Hi, I'm Larry Levin. Welcome to another edition of Kop Talk. With me, as always, is esteemed editor-in-chief Emeritus Bob Cohn and a special guest, Karen Aroesty, the regional director of the Anti-Defamation League, with our producer, Mike Sherwin. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Karen, thanks for taking the time in what I guess we can agree is a very tense and challenging summer. All eyes are on our area, probably more than we would like, by virtue of the events in Ferguson. As we evolve from the initial events through the throes of social and racial tension, we now face an indictment and a trial, potentially. We've seen in other racially charged events in the past that the focus on the trial can really disrupt the constructive engagement and efforts of those in the community. How do you read the tea leaves on what we might see in the coming weeks?
I think a lot of it is going to depend on the grand jury. If the grand jury comes back with a no true bill, which is essentially a non-indictment in Officer Wilson's case, I think there are going to be a lot of really angry people. And my sense is that policing around the country is concerned that that's going to have impact not just here but nationwide. Mm-hmm. So I think there's let's call it a formal anticipation of what might happen if that non-indictment comes back the end of September, beginning of October.
Yeah, Bob, what do you think?
I think she's right. I think the situation is extremely volatile, and it seems to quiet down and then it gets reignited. I think it's unhelpful that the governor of the state and the prosecuting attorney in St. Louis County are at loggerheads with one another, and there's a real lack of coordination, kind of cooperation we saw in the past in the aftermath of Martin Luther King's assassination, for example, where the entire community came together and we escaped a riot here in St. Louis.
Is there a way to disengage from a public communication perspective the trial from the underlying elements, or is there not? I mean, the trial itself is based on facts as they're presented to a grand jury. I know those of us kind of who spend our lives on this inside baseball understand that. A lot of people don't.
Right. Well, but the grand jury is a
surrogate.
That's a good word. I was trying to look for it. I was going to say a surrogate for a prosecuting attorney. And there's a great consistent argument that it's very rare that a grand jury doesn't come back with an indictment when a prosecuting attorney is doing the job they are hired to do. But you never know. And people who come under grand juries are from all over the region. They represent a lot of different viewpoints, and they have different lenses in this. And I think if there's one thing that's plain out there, it's that everybody is viewing this with a different lens, and there is simply no necessary commonality, regardless of color, frankly.
And Bob, I mean, even if the county prosecutor remains the prosecutor, prosecutors do like to win their cases. I mean, absolutely. So if there's an indictment issue, one wouldn't expect any sort of softballing, would one?
We would not. And also, Robert McCulloch has been reelected 3 times after his initial election. He's a seasoned prosecutor. He's highly professional. He's highly respected in his field. He does have the life experience of his father having been, who was a policeman who was
very
killed.
real. That is very real.
Thing. You also have to look at, the Trayvon Martin case, to which this has often been compared. George Zimmerman was acquitted, and there wasn't the huge explosion in that community. And I'm hoping, if whatever the result is, the calmer heads in the community, the elders who have been quieting down, at least the peaceful demonstrators in Ferguson, will prevail rather than having another explosion.
I am waiting to see if there isn't any movement in the Powell shooting. Mm-hmm. There's just not a lot of reaction out there, and I find that very odd. Once the video
Why do you think that is?
I think there's a way to look at that video and see it as exculpatory for the police who were involved, but they also shot their clips. There were 12 shots at Mr. Powell, who was, clearly acting strangely, but was shoplifting. Whether or not he was setting himself up for suicide by cop, I think there's a lot more information that's going to need to come down the pike. But the way we've seen this play out, the video piece, the Twitter piece, is an influence, and that starts to build over time in a remarkable way that influences public opinion.
There is, and let's distinguish the overall video mass out there from the media itself. I mean, the media frenzy has been insane. And in fact, a friend shared with us today a web posting by a photographer who's been covering Ferguson, a professional photographer. But now he's saying he's admittedly embarrassed by the media role, suggesting that by the overwhelming presence and the insistence on close-up access and portrayal of what's happening, the media has actually become part of the story and not,
absolutely,
and it's not totally serving a constructive role. What do you think about that?
Well, I wanted to bring for show and tell for this program the front page of the Post-Dispatch, which shows a guy in full military gear and flames coming out of, I'm assuming it's a tear gas canister. It literally looks like a cover of a video game that my grandson might have, a high combat
Good point.
game type of a thing. So the media has played a mixed role, and in some cases they have been manhandled inappropriately by some of the law enforcement officers. The press club board met the other day, and we passed a resolution that just denounced the manhandling of our journalists. So it's the media part of it is very complicated.
The other piece of that is that the new Black Panther Party have been made out to look like a bunch of Boy Scouts.
Yeah.
And they are far from that. We issued a statement, a public statement yesterday about the new Black Panther Party and Malik Shabazz in particular. I think policing was in a tough place to condemn their activity because their argument was we're just traffic control and crowd control, and frankly from a race relations perspective, the idea that they would be perceived to be saying no to a group that's primarily African American obviously is another reason, but it helped validate their activity, and so now kind of turning that around and saying, look, these guys are dangerous, they are racist, they are anti-government, and they are very anti-Semitic, is something that needs to be out there.
What a nice transition, nice may be a relative term, but what a nice transition from what's been going on here to what's going on across the globe in the Middle East, which we've of course written about. And this week we wrote an editorial comparing and contrasting the media coverage and the world coverage with respect to the Middle East. So obviously that's fanned the anti-Semitic flames about as badly as anything we've seen over the last several decades. So are you guys focusing on the strategies and tactics you've always used, or are there kind of new things that you've used to approach what's been a very, very challenging situation?
I'm not so sure I would say they're new things. I think they are things that are responsive to the particular environments. For instance, Sevilla, Spain, has recently passed in its city council a boycott, divestment, and sanctions policy, which they say will influence all of their activities, and they declared the Israeli ambassador to Spain persona non grata. It turns out that in the Sister Cities program from the State Department, their sister city is Kansas City, Missouri. So we've been in touch with the mayor in Kansas City, and we'll hopefully get some commitment to follow up, at least through those channels. And you never know whether that stuff's going to be successful, but the idea that people to people and grassroots kind of advocacy can have an impact, in unique settings where they need to be addressed. Frankly, beyond that, I think no one can underestimate the beheading of James Foley and the impact of ISIS and the way in which we have to pay really close attention to the impact that will have for the United States and the UK, particularly for security concerns in the coming months. And I think that's broadly and as well as for the Jewish community, because I think it's very hard now to say that ISIS or ISIL is going to end up acting like Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula did initially, but I don't think we can underestimate the goals they have, which are, not simply limited to the caliphate in the region, but could have consequences beyond.
And I'm going to come back to the ADL in a minute, but I want to ask your perspective on that because it's really raising a question about what journalists are able to cover, from a safe perspective, not from a safe perspective. How's it going to affect media and journalism in the region?
Well, it's going to have a very serious chilling effect because nobody wants to be suicidal. It happens that Mr. Foley had been detained in Libya.
Right.
Richard Engel disappeared in Syria for a while. Milton Movitz and I, Milton from San Luis, we were in Lebanon, and we were taken to the PLO camps, and I was recording into my tape recording, thinking we would be ideal hostages, and I was not really kidding at the time. So are we going to, and there is documented evidence that Hamas has harassed and pressured and threatened journalists trying to get an objective take on what's going on over there.
Now let's take that and bring it back home again. So we've seen protests locally, we sometimes with anti-Semitic elements, sometimes not, and we've seen acts like the incident at Westwood Country Club with the bad words that were cut into the ground.
That won't be solved.
It may not be solved, but it's indicative of the climate.
No question.
To both of you, how does it both help and hurt for those kinds of incidents to be made public and covered in the media? And we've talked about this in the past about what you do cover and what you don't cover. Are those things more like the Westboro Baptist Church, who you don't want to give attention to? Are they different because of the context of what's going on? Do you cover them? What are your thoughts?
I think, again, each situation is unique. The Westboro Baptist Church has created its own storyline that allows for the response to it to be what it needs to be. I think the Westwood Country Club, I think issues of global anti-Semitism as well as things that are happening locally have to be out there. In the post-Overland Park conversations, one of the things I've found is truly disturbing. And that is where I would like to see, because we also talk about security for the Jewish community, where I would like to see security be tightened and for synagogues and Jewish institutions to really truly engage in the, call it emergency management or safety committee if people are too nervous about using the word security committee. I would like to see more of it. I would like to see a sense that people in this community are empowered to be a part of their own security, not simply in their own self-interest, but more broadly. What I'm seeing otherwise is the opposite. And that is that if you look at a lot of the synagogues, for instance, for the high holidays this year, they're going ticketless. They're going ticketless with no RSVPs. And I understand there are a lot of reasons to do that in terms of, you know, building attendance and wanting people to feel as if it's easy to come in. From a security perspective, it's lousy.
From a former synagogue president's perspective, how do you relate to that?
Well, Karen is making a very valid point. We used to have to present our ticket, and an officer who knew the membership had to sign off before they could come in, and there were uniformed police at the door. So that was in the aftermath of 9/11. Now it's anyone can come in, kind of sight unseen. There is absolutely no inspection. So it is a volatile situation.
And I think when we sort of reduce ourselves to saying we'll rely on the off-duty police officers that we hire, that's abrogating our own individual and community responsibility.
Let's talk about, you were talking about us collectively as adults, let's talk about kids. You guys do an awful lot with kids about hate, and what kind of feedback are you getting from kids in particular about all of these events this terrible summer? And are you seeing hope? Are you seeing change in reactions and reflections?
I'm in a wait-and-see moment right now on Ferguson. We have some good news, basically. I was in a meeting on Sunday last with Larry LaRue, who's the superintendent for Ferguson Florissant, and while they have certainly postponed school for their reasons, they are prepared to do a lot of counseling and education and working very candidly with their students. We have this thing called a current events classroom, which when things have happened like Trayvon Martin and others, we create, and most of those are 9th to 12th grade curricula. Yesterday was picked up as mandatory for the Los Angeles Unified School District, which is the largest school district in the country, and I'm hoping that around the country those moves are similar, and that there is an intentional and purposeful way that schools go about talking about this. There is a way to talk to little kids. You just have to do it, and educators and counselors alike just have to have the confidence. And that's part of our other training, which is trying to give educators the confidence to be able to have these tough conversations in the classroom. It's a slow process, but we'll get there.
Thanks so much. That's all the time we have. Thanks for joining us on Kop Talk.
Pleasure.
Thanks to Karen Aroesty, to Bob Cohn, to our Board of Trustees who is watching us today, to Mike Sherwin, our producer. We say take care, see you soon. Bye.